your consultancy? What's that really good, important lesson?
You can't change the outside if you don't change the inside. I would say that for sure. I think that's really the catalyst of like transformational thinking, right? So much about business I've learned is about courage, and courage. What I've learned about courage is that it means to feel the fear and do it anyway. So it's just, so much of it is that. And, you know, and I think the other thing that comes to mind too is just this idea of, don't be like shady, don't be flaky, just be straight up, right?
Yeah,
like that's the other thing about business that I've really, that I've learned over the years. But definitely this thing is rooted in courage. And it's like, that is always, feels like it's always the call to action, right? Like, where's the courage? And I think there's a lot of confusion even when it comes to courage as well, because I think that a lot of people believe that those that are, you know, accomplishing great things and those that are successful don't have any fear.
Yeah. No, they do. And they are, you know, experiencing maybe their own imposter syndrome, their own fear, or whatever it might be. And they don't see it. I love to just own it. I was just at a conference last week. And a few of the, I was pitching on stage in front of a lot of people. And then, a bunch of founders that come to me like, how are you so comfortable on stage? I was like, well, one, I was nervous as all get out and almost felt like I was going to puke before I walked on, but I have my own methods of figuring out how to make it through that. I only had a 3-minute pitch that day on like this big Atlanta Symphony stage. And I just told myself I can do anything for 3 minutes. And I just tried to be present for those 3 minutes. But it was a crazy week. And so many founders were like, oh, I'm having imposter syndrome. I feel like I didn't prepare enough. I'm fearful of like, you know, what's to come for my company during this recession, all of that. And I was like, me too. I'm right there with you. Like, don't think there's anything special about me. Because I don't think we talk about it enough. And we're all so busy, especially as entrepreneurs, working, doing all of our stuff, trying to take care of ourselves, that we oftentimes are, when we're in it, the last people to talk about it. And it doesn't always hit the same when it's like somebody that's been super successful that then talks about it and tells you about it. You're like, okay, yeah, but like, maybe you took some other kind of special unicorn path that I wasn't on. But it's the truth. I mean, we struggle so much with that. We don't talk about it enough in entrepreneurship, for sure.
For sure. And I think as women, it's a bit of a struggle too, right? Like it's, you know, just thinking that, there is no fallback. So we don't, you know, want to take any chances. And, you know, there's just this like secret society of like suffering, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And it's, the real thing is that each and every person is really leaning into their courage. And you just never know how far someone has to lean into why they are here today. And, you know, I think sometimes to even assume sometimes that there isn't any difficulty, it feels like, I know for me, it has felt in the past like a minimizing of what the hell it took for me to get here.
Like,
you know, don't for a second think that, you know, I didn't like scale Everest trying to get here.
Exactly. Yeah, it's so true. It's like, do you really want me to tell you everything that that made this possible? It's like, you know, like those ads was like, and it was made possible by this. I'm like, literal blood, sweat, and tears, and some, like, that is literally what it took to get here. But we also, I know as entrepreneurs, don't like to dwell on that all the time, because we're like, we've been through it. Let's move to something else. But I think it really is important to acknowledge that. And I love when I'm able to bring that up on the podcast of like, people, it is not like, people ask me, you know, what's the number one piece of advice you want to give to a freelancer or a business owner that's just starting? It's not as easy as it looks. And I think they need to understand that. They need to know that going into it, because if you have this perspective that you're going to scale massively fast, you're going to be the next Uber, like all of these things, you are setting yourself up for failure. Yes, you need to dream big. You need to set massive goals. You need to go for the stars, but you need to understand how things work too. So you're not like really upset at yourself or frustrated or whatever that might be down the line.
Mm-hmm. And it takes a lot. It takes a lot, you know, like again, this whole idea that it's easy, right? And it's like, but I think that, you know, there's a lot to be said about those people that talk about their journey and the difficulty. And I had a laugh with a friend one day because I was like, how do you think this is easy? Okay, fine. Like I stood up. I was like, do you see the sweat under my boobs? Like I am freaking out, right? Yes, like the anxiety of everything that's happening. And I think, you know, we had a good laugh, and then she, you know, shared something about, you know, how anxiety shows up in her body, and it doesn't change that I'm going to sit in this seat and I'm going to do this damn pitch, or I'm going to do this podcast, or I'm going to do this next hard step. That is not really changing. But the way that, you know, my body is processing this work, this transition, this courage, this showing up, I think is important to talk about. So, and it's fun when you do too.
Yes, for sure. No,
validating.
It is. And I think that there's so many things I've heard from other founders, entrepreneurs, just like what happens when we're stressed, and we all react so differently. But I think what we learn throughout all of it, if we're able to keep persevering through it, is like, okay, this is what happens. I know what's happened. Like me, it always hits like a week after the really stressful event. That's how my stress hits. So I usually can show up pretty good in my element when I need to, but then it's like after. So I know that I have to build in that time post an event or post like things that are happening to prepare that I'm going to feel like a literal truck hit me for like a week. And I have to just honor that. And so for me, it was like, as soon as I got back from that event, I took most of Friday off. I laid down, I relaxed, I tried to rest over the weekend. And then I was much better off this week than I could have been. Still trying not to work 1 million hours a week this week. But I think that's important for entrepreneurs to know too, is like, you can figure out how this works into your life and how you can be better at it if you get the right tools and strategies to do that. For sure. So I know that you talk a lot and help business owners specifically help them kind of with their sustainable and scalable systems, helping to get those set up and support them around it. What would be, speaking of scaling, what is your number one tip for scaling a business? I know that I'm sure you work on a lot of strategies. There's not one thing that will help everybody, but if you could give one tip, what would that be?
Well, I think clarity around where you are in the scaling scale, if you will. Scaling scale? No. Where you are. So like kind of where you are with that. Are you looking to get your first 1,000 users type thing, or are you looking for a long-term strategy? Because I think that the strategies are very different with those. So, you know, for those that are looking to get their first 1,000 users, that type of thing, definitely like content, right? And getting press is really, really important. But the tools for, you know, longer term growth, I think is around like virality, around like getting something out there that, you know, people want to share and people want to talk about. I think another useful way is SEO. That is, some people are coming out of their email boxes a little bit because they're saturated, right? So search could be a really important tool. And as well as some people use paid growth ads and stuff like that, right? As a tool. So I would say like those things, but being clear about where are you in the whole thing? Are you just looking to get your first 1,000 users, or is it more of a longer term strategy? I think that matters.
Yeah, no, I definitely think it is. And also to kind of pick that apart a little more, just looking at, okay, well, if you're looking for 1,000 users versus your first 100 users, it's very different approach too. Maybe some of the same, solutions would work, but making sure you're segmenting those metrics out too. A lot of times people just go too big, too fast, like focus on what you can build and then add to, and then continue to grow from. And I know that I've messed that up at different times in building this company too, because you want to hit your end year goal, but you have to reverse engineer all of that to get your, first quarter goal, and make sure that you're hitting those as you continue to go forth. And then having a plan for, okay, we might not reach this, but what was the reasoning around that? Was it smart for us to go in certain directions, and being able to analyze that, which can be hard at times. Along with that scaling question, is there a system or a way of going about preparing for that scaling or growing a business that you really have found has been really helpful for your clients? Maybe a specific platform or a mindset of systems that help to support?
I guess the things that come to mind, I want to flag a common pitfall, and that is where people use, they select too many, growth engines. And so that can be really hard to work on. So I think the key there is to really master one and go really deep into that. As far as, executing within your selected like growth engine, I really like to use a very simple framework, and that's like now, next, later. Right? What can you do right now? What will you do next? And what will you do later? And sometimes, like a lot of the times, people get really caught up in the organizing and the structuring of the growth engine. And really and truly, I think a lot of the times that is just another avoidant strategy often people use. So to avoid all of that, I often have my clients like use a now, next, later method to just get started.
No, that's a really good. And it's just to get all of those things, if they are more what I always tell our team, like, is that the parking lot that needs to wait until another day that we'll get to? Or is that something that we really could help move the business today, right now? What are those things that we can focus on? And you should definitely have some that fit every one of those, now, next, and later. So you can prepare for those and start working on those when you've kind of like nailed the now. But if you don't prepare for a little bit of future, you'll regret it with your pipeline of stuff, but also you'll be overwhelmed if you try to start all of that and you won't do any of it well, which is something that can be really hard when you're starting to prioritize what should go first, second, and third within a business, for sure. No, that's great advice for everybody listening today. Especially, we oftentimes have a lot of business owners that are very overwhelmed when they're coming to us. Oh, I need to hire for all of these different things, or I need support in all of these. That's great, but what's your biggest pain point right now? What is something that's either blocking you, keeping you from being successful and moving forward? That's usually the best one to kind of hit at. And it's often something they can do now to actually make that needle move and help them to grow their business.
Sure. I often find that it's foundational in that like mindset stuff, right? Like if you can't change the outside without changing the inside. And it's just, really leaning into that work. Like what is interfering with you having the courage to make this move?
Exactly.
So I find that, strategy is one thing. Tactics never go deep enough. What's the thing that is, going to lead to the biggest change and the longest term change? And I think it's just addressing some of those internal obstacles.
Yeah, for sure. No, that it's definitely definitely those obstacles that we need to come. I mean, just like those theme from last week, everybody has imposter syndrome. Everybody's worried about their ability to show up when we all feel that way. We all are, not always the experts at everything, but that doesn't mean that we can't still show up and build a business in a successful way. So one question.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, I never get the thing about imposter syndrome. Of course people have it. You've never done it before.
Exactly.
Even if you have,
you can do it a million times and still it be nerve-wracking for you and feel out of place. Yeah.
But you've never done it this way today. Doing the podcast that you've done maybe 100 times before.
Yeah.
It's not like doing it today because we've never done a podcast together before.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
Right. Yeah. And so it's like, I tend to sort of, process that imposter stuff a little bit differently. And it's like, of course I have it because I haven't done this before.
Yeah.
And some of the interesting things, I had a really interesting conversation the other day with a friend around imposter syndrome. And it's like, what about those parts of imposter syndrome that people don't talk about when people do say that they can do things that they really can't do?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
That's a whole other podcast.
For sure. I mean, that is like a series of podcast episodes. It really is. And, I was actually joking when I was speaking on stage out of my comfort zone about a month ago, because everybody always asks women about imposter syndrome. It's just a typical question that especially as a female founder and a tech founder, they're like, how do you feel in this space? And I'm like, well, I mean, it is what it is. But also imposter syndrome is not something that that term took on everything around.
It's true.
The term quiet quitting too, I feel took on everything that's wrong in the workforce right now. And I think imposter syndrome too, whereas I always looked at imposter syndrome as me putting also people on a pedestal, thinking they're the only ones that can do this at this point. They're the only female founders that have achieved this, or, oh, she's she's raised 30 million. I've only raised 500K, all of those kind of things, and putting people that are out there and then us stepping into those same zones with them and feeling like an imposter in that room. And that's how I always looked at it, but it's now taken its own way of looking at life, is that everything's an imposter syndrome situation. Whereas it could just be you didn't prepare enough for that event and you're feeling a little nervous, but we're putting it all into one bucket right now. And I think it's important to feel how are you actually feeling? Are you feeling an imposter, or are you just feeling nervous in this situation, or are you feeling unprepared? Because you can tackle that a lot better. If you're feeling unprepared, I mean, just next time you go to an event, prepare a little bit more or ask for advice on how you can do that. But instead of spiraling out there, look at what you can change today in that space to be more prepared. I think we oftentimes just coin the term incorrectly.
It's true. And then we all know as entrepreneurs that we've dealt with actual imposters, people that say that we hire and that they say, I could build this website for you, or I could do this thing for you, or whatever. And they're saying it and they really can't do it. And they know they can't do it. So it's there's those experiences. And when we look at ourselves and we think, wait a second, I've been the victim of an imposter. I've hired someone that said they could do something that they can't. Is this the behavior I'm showing up with here? And no. It's not, right? It is not that behavior. It's just feeling nervous, as you said, and it's feeling maybe a little bit out of place, and sort of what narratives, influence you to be feeling that way. So this whole imposter syndrome thing, like you said, is all one bucket. It minimizes when it happens to us. When people do it to us, and that's not a good feeling. And it's changed so much, and it's, I think, become really blurry as to,
For
you know,
sure.
what it all is. I think it's kind of like the word diva, right? One minute it was like really, you know, you're awesome. Next minute you're, you know, not so nice person.
I know.
Right?
Did you listen to the podcast on that with Meghan Markle?
I did.
About diva. Yeah, me too.
Did.
Yeah. That was a really good, and I love that whole podcast of just breaking down these words that have just completely changed the way that, I mean, I remember, like, I mean, diva was the word. You wanted to be a diva. Yeah. And I mean, it's sad that it's taken this this change in title, and how people approach it. But every word, and words are so powerful. And I think that's something that we oftentimes, especially when it comes to emotions and feelings, we really need to make sure that we are really looking at the words that we are saying and being mindful of those. I know Brene Brown has that fabulous book called Atlas of the Heart. And I keep telling myself I need to be more mindful of like actually reading it and looking at it from a leader perspective too. So I'm always choosing as best words as I can about how I'm feeling and how our team might be feeling, to be able to approach it in the right way. Because oftentimes it's not the right word at all. Like overwhelmed. I feel like that's another word that we use all the time that could mean a million things. Like, are you overwhelmed and actually tired because you're leading to burnout? Or are you overwhelmed because I gave you too much work? Like, what is the overwhelm coming from? Are you not equipped to handle that work? Like, there's just so many things that could be coming in from that. But I think it's important that we do those touch bases with ourselves and ourselves as a leader, our team, whoever we're working with, our clients, whatever it might be, to go, just how are you feeling? Like, and really, like, how are you feeling? Because I think it's so important for us to be able to see that, because that's usually when some of those like imposter syndrome or things come into place where we're like, oh, like, did I do something wrong? Am I like overthinking this? Am I not? When really, if we had just probably asked or like figured out how people are feeling, those things wouldn't have come into play.
For sure.
Yeah, we could talk about this all day. I do want to shift a little bit to talk for our last few minutes on what are some ways that we can take care of ourselves as business owners. I know that you do a lot of work in the space of self-care. And we've talked a lot about kind of, different ways that we're all navigating this life as a business owner. But what are some tips or advice that you would give around taking care of ourselves?
It's kind of interesting when it comes to this topic, because I often say that we know everything about everyone else so well, but we know nothing about ourselves. Right? It's like, true, yeah. You know what, is happening in your partner's life. What, Meghan Markle wore to such event, right? Like there's all these things that we know about all these different people, but we don't know much about ourselves. And I think that a primary thing is to really meditation is about practicing meditation. And for me, it's about becoming more familiar with how your mind works. So to get to know like the states of mind that cause you suffering, and to think about the states of mind that bring you freedom, and, getting to know that more and being able to do more of that. I know what I know what I'm feeling, and I know what this is, and I know what not to do, and I know what to do. But it's like familiarity is a really, really important fact. And I think that we have to be able to practice stillness, meditation. And when I say meditation, I meditate like probably, 10 or 20 times a day for about 30 seconds to a minute each time. That's how I, integrate it into my life. And it is just, for me, it's like simple, anchoring right into my body. And, I feel, especially when like stress turns up, or just times that I have an extra minute to just take the time to stop the thinking. Because I think the other thing about thinking is that when we take breaks from thinking, we become better thinkers when we need to think.
Right? It's so true. And just like I tried to turn my brain, just that same concept of just turn my brain off, because my brain just spirals all the time. And with a lot of the ways that I handle my anxiety is by busying myself with other things and constantly staying busy, which I know is my problem. But it's so valuable when we do stop our brains. And I know not everybody is able, meditates in the same way. I usually have a hard time being still, but what I found is when I am still and clear my mind, how much clarity I can receive too. Whether it's that moment in space and time or not, it does give me that break, that brain break in so many ways to regroup and rethink. And my husband is his midlife, I joke, but his midlife crisis was to start meditating and doing yoga, which is probably a good midlife crisis.
Sure.
But it's entertaining because he was like totally not into this like a few years ago, like really not into it and not really like ever thought it was cool. But he's like dove really deep into it, not just like the fluff level. And so he meditates every morning and does these yogic stretches. And every morning he has so many ideas. And he has a whole notebook that he keeps these ideas. Maybe one day he'll turn them into a company. Probably not. But he just has all of the stuff that comes out of his mind. And I see the value in it. And I try to do it as much as I can. But he's very consistent with that practice. And it just clears his mind every single day to provide more space and ability to do that. And so he will have more space to remember stuff. He has more space to fill it with good things as well in the day. And I always tell him I need to get like you, because I wish I had that more space in my head, but also more space in my life. Because if not, we're constantly spinning.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree. I mean, if you're living in yesterday, then you're not making space for today, right? Yes. And to be present with what's going on. So I think that it's something worth practicing. And when I say practicing, I mean that practicing forever, right? I am nowhere near, being a sage with any of this. I am in constant practice of 30-second increments, 1 minute increments. It usually doesn't really last that much longer than a minute, right? Before the old mind says, get up and go do something, right? So, those 30-second intervals, they make a world of difference. So, I would say that that's a really, really, really important thing to incorporate.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I know that when I feel like I'm hitting up against a wall and just I can't figure out what to do next, I can't see clearly what the now, next, and later really is for us, or I just feel like I'm hitting a wall, that if I just am able to go outside and take a walk or just do something that gets my mind off of the now, that usually helps a significant amount and is really good for taking care of ourselves, or taking I'm pretty intentional about making sure that I don't do any work on Saturdays. And as a founder, I wish I could do no weekend work at all. But I usually have to regroup myself a little bit on Sunday to prepare for the next week. But that's more of me taking care of myself too. So I just am very thoughtful about the start of my week and the transition into the week instead of being stressed out about it. But I know that when I take those mind breaks, especially a full day when I can away from my work, that is really helpful for me as a business owner too, to get that clarity, but also just that, hey, I took care of myself and thought about something besides my business for a little bit.
Yeah. And it helps you to move forward joyfully, right?
It does.
That is the big thing, being really thoughtful and joyful about what your next steps are. That truly is a sustainable strategy that, most people don't think about when they think about sustainability. But if it's not joyful, then very soon you'll be breaking promises.
Yes, exactly. It's so true. Well, I have so enjoyed having a conversation with you, and I look forward to staying in touch and getting to know more about you and helping to support you. But I'd love for you to share a little bit about where everybody can find you, so we make sure that all of our listeners go and check you out.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I very much enjoyed our conversation as well. I'd love to stay in touch. And if anyone wants to connect, they can find me on my website, which is gabriellethomas.co or gigi-thomas.com. There's lots of stuff there. I recently put up a guide for, being fearless with your communication. So I'd love for people to come out and check that out.
Awesome. Well, yes, definitely everybody go to Gabrielle's website, get that guide. That is super important to be fearless when you're communicating, and it can be insanely powerful. And it's something to practice over and over again and get better at. But thank you so much for being on here today. We'll list all of that information in the show notes. And until next time, thank you for listening in to LOB Radio. We'll be back next week where we talk to another entrepreneur that is doing awesome things in this world, and we'll share tips and tricks on how to take care of yourself in both business and in life. Have a good day, everybody.